Hello, my love, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Achila Yona, and today we're going to be talking about reconnecting with your Indigenous ancestry. Before I give y'all guys the steps to reconnecting with your Indigenous heritage, I'm going to give y'all guys a little background story about myself. Growing up, I was told that I was Black, and I was taught the Black perspective, meaning that I see life through the eyes of a person who is identified as Black. And before you negative Nancy's hop in the comic section trying to make it sound like I'm saying being Black is a horrible thing, what I'm saying is many of us have been taught that we are of a different demographic than what we truly are. And if you are familiar with my channel and you have been a subscriber for a hot minute, you know that I do not subscribe to the titles and names that colonizers have given people of different ethnic backgrounds and races. So I don't believe in terms like Black, colored, Negro, Indian, etc., unless I'm speaking about something that is genealogy based, or I'm just using those terms so people know what I'm talking about and what I'm referring to. Other than that, I do not mess with colonial terms or terms that pale people have created to subjugate people in general. Now, when it comes to my upbringing, my parents talked about being Black. However, my elders talked about being Indigenous and coming from Indigenous backgrounds. And anytime I would bring this up to my parents, they would make it clear that because of how Black people are seen in America, there is no room to identify as anything else because of how society sees us. Sadly, I fell into the trap of, well, if you have one drop of Black blood or African blood, therefore you're African. And if you don't want to claim to be African, you hate yourself. I used to be one of those pro-Black people that was so hardcore that you cannot tell me nothing. And I was so hard-headed about it. And that's one thing I wish I wasn't so headstrong about. But if I wasn't like that, I wouldn't be able to have this much wisdom I have today. So, as the saying goes, it is what it is. When I was around 17 or 18 years old, I started to involve myself in witchcraft and hoodoo, and I used these spiritual systems to connect with my ancestors. And one thing that really stood out to me in this experience I had was I remember going outside and standing in front of this big tree. And I imagined my loved ones who passed away at this tree standing there smiling at me. And I remember talking to them at this tree, and I kept calling them African. And I remember just feeling like this bombastic side eye from them. They were not feeling it. They were not feeling it. They was ready to cut the phone line and be like, you know what? You doing too much, girl. I don't like this. And quite frankly, I knew better because the elders I imagined or saw at that tree, they never talked about being Black. They pretty much identified as being Indigenous or Indian. So, yeah, there was definitely a disconnect there. And looking back, I can tell why. Because I already knew the truth, but yet I was so caught up on identifying as being pro-Black and African that I just disregarded what they always identified as and seen themselves as well. In the middle or end of 2019, I started seeing imagery of Baphomet. And I remember seeing this deity pretty much everywhere. At first, it came up on my TV because I don't know if I was watching like the news or something. I don't know, something. I was watching something and Baphomet popped up on it. And I was like, oh, okay. And then so I get on my phone and I see someone on Facebook posted it. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, okay, so obviously this deity is pretty much being everywhere in my peripheral. And so I remember I met someone who involved himself in Baphomet. And this man was nefarious, very nefarious. But I'm not going to bore you with the details, but I will tell you once I stopped associating with him, Baphomet pretty much got closer to me and I got closer to Baphomet. And so during the time where I would be close with this deity, I started to learn more about myself. I started to learn more about the real Aboriginal American history. I was coming across this man's, I'm going to call it historical meme. And I remember of it saying the good ship Jesus didn't come to the United States. It went somewhere else. I can't remember exactly where, but I remember seeing that man posted that meme of his, and I'm like, what? Literally, my whole time being in the conscious community, I was told that we all was exposed to the good ship Jesus, and that's how we know about Jesus and all the other stuff. So actually seeing the real information about that, I'm like, okay, I'm curious. And I contacted the guy, and after that, I pretty much became awoken to the history of Aboriginal Americans. And ever since then, it has stuck with me because after I kept learning information, I eventually decided to start doing my genealogy research. And in the beginning, it was hard, y'all. It was hard to come across any information about my ancestors, let alone my elders. I felt like my people came from Mexico, and that's why we was not finding any documentation at the time, because I'm like, oh my God, like, did we just sneak over here or something? Because I'm not finding anything. And it was frustrating. Like, y'all, I remember wanting to cry. I wanted to cry so bad because I couldn't find any information on my family. But one day I did. And if I can recall correctly, I believe that I learned about my ancestors during the holiday of the Day of the Dead, the Mexican holiday. And what's so crazy about it is that that's when I learned about my Mexican heritage. I learned so much about my ancestors, and the fact that so many records and documents was pouring in during this time too, it's not a coincidence. I feel my ancestors picked that time for me to learn about my heritage because it aligned with who I was already am to begin with. So if you're having trouble researching your ancestry and you feel like you're not getting anywhere, trust me. I've been there. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's frustrating. But if you continue to work at it, you'll get there. And I also want to add to that when I was researching my ancestry during the Day of the Dead holiday, I was using candle magic to remove those obstacles because I don't know what was going on, but it definitely felt like it was something spiritual that was keeping me from researching my ancestry now when I think about it, because why would I have to use candle magic to come across the most basic information? Because I want to tell y'all guys too, it was so much limited information about my family. And the fact that I have over 2,000 hints in my family tree, it just doesn't make any sense for me not to find anything in the beginning. When I reached out to the guy that made that meme about the good ship Jesus, he did help me a little bit, but he was only able to come across a marriage certificate of my mom and my dad. And I'm like, that's odd. That's suspicious. And it was like that for a hot minute. I couldn't find pretty much anything on my family for a hot minute. And it made me mad. I was angry. I'm like, why I can't find anything? But yet, during the Day of the Dead, I light a candle and I start researching on Ancestry.com. And now all of a sudden, my ancestral records are popping up. They're pulling up with ease. I'm not ashamed to say that I use candle magic to help me remove obstacles when it came to researching my ancestors. Because quite frankly, we are dealing with spiritual warfare. When you have a group of people who are hell-bent in erasing the existence of non-pale people, and we all know that once you write something on paper, it is more likely that what you write will come true. So if you are writing people out of history, then obviously it's going to make it harder for future generations to research and learn more about the generation or the group of people they are trying to write out of existence. And they have been successful at it for years, hundreds of years. So I have had the pale natives and the naysayers and the trolls say that I use candle magic to manipulate the paperwork into saying that I'm indigenous. However, I don't have to do that, sweetie. I don't have to do spell work to manipulate things in my favor. Because once you have mastered the mental matrix that you have in your own mind, you don't have to rely on candle magic to make things come true. I only use candle magic to remove obstacles so I can learn more about my family, because at the time I wasn't learning anything. I wasn't finding pretty much anything. It was hard for me to even just get past my grandparents. That's how hard it was when it came to me researching my family lineages. It was difficult. It was hard. So yeah, I was going to light a candle to help me remove these obstacles, because what does the spirit of confusion don't want me to see? what it doesn't want me to know. That's my concern. I don't have to use candle magic to manipulate anything in my favor. I don't have to. At this point, I don't even do magic like I used to. I don't do candle magic anymore. I may do some glamour here and there, but that's about it. Because the mind is powerful. And when you know how to manifest within your mind, everything else pretty much is for show. Like if I was to do candle magic right now, I would pretty much be doing it for the aesthetic, just for the hell of it, not because I need to. But back then, I needed to do candle magic to remove those obstacles. I needed to burn that candle to let the spirits on the other side fight the battle that I'm dealing with on my side. Because candles help spirits pass into the physical realm that we are at. And obviously, there's a spiritual warfare going on my ancestors' paperwork. So I need my ancestors to come through and fight these battles that I cannot see. Oh, yeah, I also have a video on how to uncover your ancestral documents using candle magic. I have a video on that on my YouTube membership. Be sure to join to watch that video because I gave out so many good tips and tricks on how to utilize candle magic to your advantage when it comes to researching your genealogy records. So definitely don't want to miss out on that. Alrighty, so this podcast is getting longer than what I anticipated. So let me just go ahead and give y'all the step-by-step play on reconnecting with your Indigenous heritage. First up, you're going to want to start researching your ancestry. I know, shocking, right? But that's literally the first step. That's literally the first step to all this. So this means not only you're going to have to research those documents, but you're going to have to talk to your elders and family members too. And I'm going to give y'all a short little personal story of mine. My mom, she burns her hair on the stove. And I remember my aunt was talking to me about this. She was like, oh, your mom is very, superstitious, and, she doesn't, want her hair to be thrown in the trash and all this other stuff. And then, so tell me why. I was talking to my cousin the other day, and I told her, I was like, oh my God, something burning. She's like, oh yeah, I burned my hair on the stove. And I'm like, you burn your hair on the stove? She's like, yeah. And I'm like, you know what? My mama do that. And she's like, really? I was like, yeah. And I told her, I was like, this is actually an indigenous tradition. Many indigenous people burn the hair instead of throw it away. And then she tells me, she's like, oh, well, I burn, my hair so it doesn't end up in the bird nest and make me go crazy. And I have heard someone say that before. So I just thought it was interesting that, my mom and my cousin practice this tradition, because a lot of people don't know this is indigenous tradition as well. So definitely talk to your peoples and see what traditions they do that are actually indigenous. Once you gather your information, research beyond online searches by connecting with indigenous cultural centers, local communities, and organizations. Attend cultural events, powwows, or even community gatherings. Speak with tribal members, elders, or cultural leaders for firsthand information on your heritage. Now, I do want to add a disclaimer. Not everyone from these indigenous nations and communities will probably know what you're talking about. There's so much information that is not made public or known to everybody, including people who are enrolled in indigenous nations. I can tell y'all firsthand, when I was experiencing like black shadows, I would talk about that, with people of different nations. And of course, the pale natives, they don't know what I'm talking about. So they'd be like, oh, you're making it up. I don't know what you're talking about. You're pretending and blah, 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 blah. But even the melanated Aboriginal folks had no idea what I was talking about when it came to that subject. And it wasn't until I did more research and found out that these black figures, these black shadows, can be and are known to be souls of people in Choctaw spirituality. And if you would like to learn more about that, I have that on my YouTube membership as well. So just keep that in mind. Just because your elders or even you may have experienced something and you can't find people to talk about it, or they have no clue what you're talking about, that information is probably for you to find out more about, and not to rely on other people to tell you or confirm what you know. Just keep that in mind. Number 3, you're going to want to uncover paper genocide and trace the paper trail in your family tree. So you're going to want to look into historical documentation of your family, pay special attention to the shifts in racial classification or name changes. Be sure to explore birth and death certificates, marriage licenses, and census records to look for clues about your ancestors' indigenous heritage. Look for terms like Negro or Black that may have been used to erase their indigenous identity. And also, by doing this, it helps you understand paper genocide and recognize it as a deliberate attempt to erase indigenous people from official documents, which, as we know on this channel that we talk about all the time, that it is a common practice to assimilate or erase indigenous people's identities. And once you uncover paper genocide and trace that paper trail, the goal of this is to reclaim your indigenous identity by uncovering the historical inaccuracies that distorted or erased it. So you're taking your power back, and you're not letting it be in the hands of the people that were trying to erase your very existence. Number 4, embrace indigenous culture in your daily life. And I want to tell y'all guys this because this is very important. You're probably already practicing your indigenous culture and don't even know it, because you don't identify the practices and rituals you do in your daily life as indigenous culture, because you probably weren't taught that they come from indigenous culture or is indigenous culture. So start incorporating indigenous traditions into your everyday life by simply identifying and honoring cultural practices that are indigenous and you may already be using. Okay? So, and this can include traditional crafts, songs, herbal remedies, spiritual practices, or even food preparation. Learn more about these practices and their deeper significance. Really give it meaning, because you may just do this every day in your life and you don't think anything of it, but you could be giving way more gratitude and honor than what you're doing right now. So just putting that out there. Also, engage with your ancestral language, customs, and rituals to deepen your connection to your heritage. And the goal of this is to live your heritage actively and recognize the cultural dignity you've carried that you may not have even known that you were doing. So recognize it as Indigenous culture and keep your head high. And don't be afraid to tell people, yeah, I practice this. Yeah. Yeah, this is part of my heritage. And I'm proud of it too. Don't be afraid to stand in your power. You have a voice for a reason. Now, last but not least, number 5, give back to Indigenous communities. Support Indigenous communities, businesses, and organizations. Volunteer, attend events, and make contributions to cultural preservation of Indigenous communities. Recognize that reconnecting with your heritage isn't just a personal journey. It's also about contributing to the survival and celebration of Indigenous traditions. By doing this, you strengthen the bond between past, present, and future generations by being an active participant in your heritage. And I just want to say this off the rip. If you are listening to this podcast, you are already supporting an Indigenous person. Pat yourself on the back. But no, seriously, I appreciate everyone that listens to my podcast and watches my content. It means everything to me because what I do is so important to me and is so essential to our community's survival and growth. So I thank everyone who watches my content and supports me because y'all could be doing anything else, but you chose to support my content. So shout out to you. Thank you. And it's very much appreciated. So, in my final thoughts of this podcast, I want to let y'all guys know that reclaiming Indigenous roots is about more than just discovering your own personal ancestry. It's about celebrating the traditions and cultural practices that may already be a part of your daily life. I want you guys to keep exploring, keep connecting, and embracing every discovery along the way. Reclaiming your heritage is a journey of both personal growth and collective cultural preservation. Now go out there and go collect those gems, gem go getters. See you in the next one.